Have you ever had one of those moments where you realize the people who are supposed to love you the most are actually the ones quietly rooting against you? Because I did. And the craziest part is it took an $8 million beach house for me to finally see it clearly. Looking back now, sitting on the deck of that same house with the Atlantic stretching out in front of me, I can almost laugh about it. Almost, but at the time, it felt like my entire family had declared war on me. My name is Ethan Mercer, I'm 32 years old, and for most of my life I was what families politely call the independent one. You know what that really means? It means you're the kid nobody worries about because nobody pays attention to you in the first place. My younger sister Claire was the star of our family from the day she was born. She was beautiful, outgoing, athletic, the kind of person who walked into a room and somehow made everyone want to talk to her. She was homecoming queen, student council president, straight A student, captain of the volleyball team. Honestly, if there was a trophy available, Claire probably had it sitting on a shelf somewhere. Meanwhile, I was the awkward kid who spent lunch breaks reading computer magazines and teaching myself how to code. My parents never said they preferred her. They didn't have to. When Claire scored a goal, we celebrated. When I won a state math competition, my dad asked if I could help fix the family printer. That was basically our family dynamic. After a while, you stop expecting applause, you stop expecting recognition, eventually you stop trying. The day I turned 18, I packed everything I owned into a beat-up Honda Civic and moved 3 states away for college. I worked 2 jobs, lived with roommates, ate enough instant noodles to probably short my life expectancy. But for the first time, I felt free. Nobody compared me to Claire, nobody reminded me what I wasn't, I could just be Ethan. Over the years, I built a career in software development, started making decent money, then good money, then the kind of money that lets you stop checking price tags before putting groceries into your cart. But my family never really knew any of that, partly because they never asked, partly because I stopped volunteering information. Every phone call somehow became about Claire. Claire got promoted. Claire bought a new car. Claire joined some charity board. Claire this, Claire that. At some point I realized I was basically a supporting character in my own family. The only person who ever seemed genuinely interested in my life was my great Uncle Walter. Now Uncle Walter was different. He never married, never had kids, and unlike the rest of my family, he didn't care whether you were popular or impressive. He cared whether you showed up. Every summer when I was growing up, I'd spend a few weeks with him at his beach property in a small coastal town called Harbor Point. That place was incredible, not because it was fancy. At least not back then. It was old, weathered, salt-stained, the kind of house that creaked when the wind blew, but Uncle Walter loved it. And honestly, so did I. We'd spend mornings repairing fences, afternoons fishing, and evenings sitting on the porch watching waves roll in. Sometimes we'd talk about life. Sometimes we'd sit there for hours without saying a word. Oddly enough, those silent moments taught me more than most conversations ever could. As I got older, he started teaching me about investing. Real estate, business, money, not in some lecture kind of way, more like stories. Every property had a story, every investment had a lesson, every mistake had a cost. By the time I graduated college, I probably understood more about financial planning than most people twice my age. And I owed all of it to him. When Uncle Walter passed away, it hit me harder than I expected. Losing him felt like losing the one person who always saw me clearly. The funeral was quiet, simple, exactly how he would have wanted it. A few weeks later came the will reading. Honestly, I wasn't expecting much, maybe a keepsake, a watch, some old fishing gear, something sentimental. Instead, my entire world changed. The attorney cleared his throat and started reading. I remember every word because they didn't make sense at first. The beach house, the entire property left to me. Then came several investment accounts, commercial real estate holdings, various financial assets, altogether worth well over $11 million. I actually thought I had misheard him. The attorney had to repeat part of it. Meanwhile, everybody else in the room looked just as stunned. Well, almost everybody, because my parents and Claire weren't even there. They'd skipped the reading. Apparently they were too busy. At the time I found it disappointing. Later I realized it was probably the biggest mistake they ever made. Over the next year I moved into the beach house permanently, not because I needed to, because it felt right. I renovated parts of it, updated the kitchen, restored the original hardwood floors, added modern security systems. Every improvement felt like honoring Uncle Walter's memory rather than replacing it. For the first time in my life, I felt settled, peaceful, happy. Then one afternoon my phone rang. Mom, I almost didn't answer, almost. Hi, sweetheart, she said in that unusually cheerful voice parents use when they're about to ask for something immediately suspicious. What's up? Oh, nothing much, just wedding planning. Wedding planning, that meant Claire, of course it did. My sister had recently got engaged to a guy named Brandon, whose family happened to have a lot of money. The wedding was becoming a massive production, the kind that somehow grows bigger every week. Then Mom casually dropped the bomb. We were wondering if the family could use your beach house for the wedding. I sat upright. My what? Your beach house? There was a pause, a small pause, but long enough because I had never told her it was a beach house. Not once. The silence stretched, then she rushed to fill it. Oh, your Aunt Denise mentioned it. The explanation came way too fast. And that's when something in my gut started whispering that this wasn't going to be a simple conversation. Not even close. I agreed to let them visit the property before making any decisions. At the time, I thought I was being reasonable. Looking back now, that was probably the moment I accidentally opened the front door and invited a storm into my life. The following Saturday, 3 SUVs rolled into my driveway like they were arriving for a property inspection instead of a family visit. I remember standing on the front porch watching them pull up, coffee mug in hand, already regretting my decision. The first person out was Claire, not my parents, not her fiancé, Claire, and the look on her face wasn't curiosity, it wasn't gratitude, it was ownership, like she had already decided this place belonged to her. The moment she stepped out of the car, she froze. The ocean was sparkling behind the house, waves crashing against the shoreline below the bluff, and for a second I saw genuine shock cross her face. Then came my mother. Oh my God, then my father. Holy hell, then Brandon, and finally Brandon's parents. Every single one of them stood there staring at the house. I probably should have enjoyed the moment. After all, I'd spent a year restoring the place. But instead I felt strangely uncomfortable because nobody was looking at me. They were looking at the house. The tour started innocently enough. I showed them the renovated kitchen, the guest suites, the deck, the gardens, the private beach access. Everyone kept asking questions. How many bedrooms? How much land? When was it built? How much was it worth? That last question came from my father directly. No hesitation, no shame. I laughed awkwardly. I'm not really sure, which was technically true. The property value had increased significantly over the years. Dad whistled. This has got to be worth a fortune. Before I could answer, Claire was already walking across the back lawn. Oh my God, she pointed toward the water. The ceremony could be right there. I blinked. What? She didn't even look at me. The ceremony right here. Then she turned toward another section of the yard. Reception tables could go there. A few steps later, dance floor there, then another. Photography station over here. I glanced toward my mother. Surely she'd tell Claire to slow down. Instead, she smiled. It's perfect, perfect. The word echoed in my head because nobody had asked whether I wanted any of this. Nobody had asked whether I was comfortable hosting 200 people on my property. Nobody had asked whether I even liked the idea. The assumption had already been made. The decision had already been made. Apparently the only person who didn't know was me. Eventually I interrupted. Guys, nobody heard me. Or maybe nobody wanted to. Guys, still nothing. Finally I raised my voice. Guys, the conversation stopped. Claire turned around. What? I took a breath. I haven't agreed to any of this. The smile disappeared instantly. What do you mean? I mean exactly that. I looked around. This is my home. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Claire laughed, actually laughed like I'd made a joke. Oh, come on, Ethan. No, I'm serious. The atmosphere shifted immediately. The same way weather changes before a storm. Nobody exploded, not yet, but I could feel the disappointment, the annoyance, the entitlement. They left a few hours later. On the surface, everything seemed fine, but something had changed. I felt it. The next morning, my phone rang. Claire, I ignored it. She called again and again. Finally, I answered. What? Hey, the florist wants to visit next Thursday. I nearly dropped the phone. The florist? Yeah, what florist? The wedding florist. I stared at the wall. Claire. What? I never said yes. Silence, then irritation. You're still thinking about that. Thinking about that. My own house. I ended the call. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. Over the next 2 weeks, the calls became relentless. Mom called about catering. Dad called about parking logistics. Claire called about guest accommodations. Brandon called to thank me for being so generous. That conversation actually made me feel bad for him. The poor guy genuinely thought everything was approved. Claire had already told people the venue was secured. Invitations were apparently being designed. People were making travel arrangements. A decision had been made without me. Again, one evening after the sixth phone call of the day, I finally snapped. I called a family meeting over video chat. Everybody joined: Mom, Dad, Claire, Brandon, even Brandon's parents. I didn't waste time. I'm not hosting the wedding. Dead silence. Claire blinked. What? I'm not hosting it. The words felt surprisingly good, simple, clear, final. Mom immediately jumped in. Honey, no. I held up a hand. This isn't happening. Dad leaned forward. Why not? Because it's my house. Because I don't want 200 strangers walking through it. Because I don't want the liability. Because I don't want the damage. Because I don't owe anybody an explanation. But instead I said something simpler. Because I'm not comfortable with it. Claire looked genuinely offended, like I'd personally attacked her. You're kidding. I'm not. Her eyes narrowed. So you're seriously ruining my wedding? I laughed. That was the first mistake, because hearing her frame it that way suddenly made everything absurd. Claire, your wedding isn't my responsibility. That didn't go over well, not at all. The argument exploded. Voices rose, accusations flew. Mom started crying. Dad started lecturing. Claire started listing all the reasons she deserved it. Not wanted it, deserved it. And that's when I finally heard something I'd been missing all along. Nobody was asking, they were demanding. In their minds, this wasn't my property. It was family property. I was just the obstacle standing in the way. The next morning I woke up to a 7-page email from my father. 7 pages. I wish I were exaggerating. The email was a masterpiece of manipulation. According to him, I was selfish, ungrateful, immature, disconnected from family values. Then came the sentence that made my blood boil. Your uncle made a mistake by concentrating so much wealth in the hands of one person. I must have read it 10 times, not because I couldn't believe it, because I could. For the first time in my life, my father was saying exactly what he thought. No filters, no pretending, no subtle favoritism, just raw honesty. The house should have gone to Claire. The money should have gone to Claire. The future should belong to Claire. I was simply occupying space. A few days later things got worse, much worse. I was sitting at my desk working when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, almost. Mr. Mercer. Yes, my name is Richard Holloway. His tone was smooth, professional. I'm an attorney representing your parents. I remember leaning back in my chair, confused. My parents need a lawyer. There was a pause, then he said something I'll never forget. We're exploring options regarding the validity of your late uncle's will. For a second, I honestly thought he was joking. I laughed out loud. The attorney didn't, and suddenly I realized he was serious, completely serious. According to him, my parents believed Uncle Walter intended the property to benefit the entire family. They supposedly had evidence, documents, witnesses, statements. The more he talked, the more ridiculous it became, because none of it was true, not a single word. But the fact they were willing to try, that hit differently. This wasn't about a wedding anymore. This wasn't about hurt feelings. This was about taking everything. The house, the inheritance, the life I'd built. After I hung up, I sat there staring at the ocean through my office window. For a long time, I kept thinking about Uncle Walter, about all those summers, about the lessons he'd taught me. One thing he used to say came back clear as day. When people show you who they are, don't argue with them, believe them. That afternoon, I hired my own attorney, and before the day ended, he gave me one piece of advice: document everything. At the time, I thought that sounded excessive. A week later, I discovered it wasn't nearly enough, because my family was about to cross a line they could never uncross. A week after I hired my attorney, things got strange, not angry strange, not lawsuit strange, performative strange. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly started reaching out. An aunt from Ohio called to check in. A cousin from Texas messaged me asking how I was doing. An uncle I barely knew left me a voicemail saying he hoped I was getting the support I needed. At first I didn't understand, then little pieces started coming together, one conversation at a time, one awkward phone call at a time. My parents had started telling people I wasn't doing well, that I was isolated, unstable. Obsessed with money, they were painting this picture of me as some lonely guy who had manipulated an elderly relative into changing a will. The funny thing about lies is that they work best when they're mixed with a little truth. I was isolated. I did keep to myself. I wasn't close to the family, so for people who didn't know the full story, their version sounded believable. For a few days, I considered fighting back. Then I decided not to, not yet. Because every time people lie, they eventually have to tell a bigger lie to support the first one. And sooner or later, that tower collapses. I just didn't realize how spectacularly it was about to happen. It started with an invitation, a formal invitation, printed cardstock, gold lettering. My parents were hosting a family dinner and wanted everyone there for a special announcement. The second I read it, alarms started going off in my head, but curiosity got the better of me, so I went. The dinner was held at my parents' house. The same house where Claire and I grew up. Walking through that front door felt weird, like stepping into a museum dedicated to someone else's childhood. The walls were still covered with Claire's achievements, photos, awards, trophies. You could remove every picture of me from that house and nobody would notice anything missing. By the time dinner started, nearly 30 relatives had arrived: aunts, uncles, cousins, even a few family friends. Everyone was laughing and chatting while Claire moved through the room accepting compliments like a politician working a campaign event. The engagement ring got plenty of attention. The wedding got plenty of attention. Claire got plenty of attention. Some things never changed. Dinner itself was surprisingly pleasant, too pleasant. People were being nice to me, suspiciously nice. I should have trusted my instincts. After dessert, my father stood up and tapped his glass with a spoon. Room quieted immediately. He smiled, the practiced smile, the one he used whenever he wanted to look like the wise patriarch of a perfect family. "Thank you all for coming." A few people applauded. Dad nodded. "As you all know, this family has been blessed recently." The second he said that, my stomach dropped. I knew I didn't know exactly what was coming, but I knew Dad continued. "Our beloved Uncle Raymond left behind a beautiful coastal estate." Notice that, not Ethan inherited a house. "The family received an estate." The wording mattered, every word mattered. Then he delivered the bomb. "After much discussion, we've decided that property will become Claire and Brandon's wedding gift as they begin their new life together." The room erupted, applause, cheers, smiles. Someone actually stood up and toasted. For a moment I just sat there, not because I was shocked, because I genuinely couldn't process the level of insanity I was witnessing. Claire was crying, my mother was crying. Brandon looked confused but happy, and all around me people were celebrating a gift that didn't belong to the people giving it. Finally I stood up, the applause slowly died, every head turned toward me. I remember feeling strangely calm, like I'd reached the point where anger no longer mattered. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Silence. My father's smile froze. "The property wasn't left to the family." I paused. "It was left to me." Nobody moved, nobody spoke. I continued, "And I have absolutely no intention of giving it away." The room went dead silent. You could literally hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Claire's face changed instantly. The tears disappeared. The smile disappeared. Everything disappeared. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about reality." The words came out colder than I intended. Mom jumped in immediately. "Honey, don't do this here." "No." I looked directly at her. "You already did this here." Claire stood up. Her voice started shaking. "You're really doing this." "Doing what?" "Ruining my future." I laughed. I couldn't help it, not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. "Your future isn't a beach house, Claire." The look she gave me could have melted steel. Then my father lost control. For years he'd hidden his favoritism behind polite excuses and family language. That night the mask came off completely. He pointed directly at me. "That property should have been hers." The room froze. Even he seemed surprised he'd said it out loud, but once the words escaped, they kept coming. "She's the one building a family. She's the one making us proud. She's the one carrying on the family name." Then came the line I'll never forget. "What have you ever done besides walk away?" That one landed, not because it hurt, because it confirmed everything, every suspicion, every memory, every doubt I'd carried since childhood. For 32 years I'd wondered whether I was imagining it. Whether the favoritism was real, whether I was being unfair, in one sentence he answered every question. I wasn't imagining any of it, I never was. I grabbed my coat and headed toward the front door. The dinner was over, at least for me, but my father followed fast. The moment we stepped outside, he grabbed my arm hard. I turned around, his face was red, his voice low, dangerously low. "You'll sign that property over." I stared at him. "What? You heard me." He squeezed harder. "You'll sign it over if you know what's good for you." Now here's the thing, a month earlier I would have been shocked. A year earlier I would have been devastated, but after everything that had happened, I was prepared. Slowly I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. The recording screen was still running. His face changed instantly. The color drained right out of him. I held the phone up. I had a feeling tonight might be interesting. For the first time all evening, my father looked scared. Not angry, scared. I pulled my arm away. "You should probably stop talking." Then I walked to my car and drove away. That recording changed everything. The next morning my attorney nearly fell out of his chair listening to it. Within hours, formal cease and desist letters were sent, not requests, not warnings, demands. Stop making ownership claims, stop spreading false information, stop harassing the client, or prepare for litigation. You'd think that would have ended things. It didn't. Because Claire made one final mistake, the biggest one. She started contacting Uncle Raymond's former business partners and longtime friends. She told them some version of the story where I had stolen her inheritance. Unfortunately for her, many of those people had known Uncle Raymond for decades, and many of them knew me too. The calls started coming, questions, confusion, concern. That was the moment I decided I was done staying quiet. I spent an entire weekend compiling evidence. Emails, letters, photographs, holiday cards, documents, witness statements, years of proof showing exactly what my relationship with Uncle Raymond had been, and then I attached the recording. I sent everything to every relative involved, every family friend, every person Claire had contacted. Then I went to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my phone looked like it had survived a natural disaster. Messages everywhere. Voicemails, emails, missed calls. People were furious, not at me, at them. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Relatives who had believed their story felt manipulated. Friends of Uncle Raymond felt disgusted. Several wedding guests reportedly withdrew their RSVPs. One family friend called my father a thief to his face. Another told Claire she should be ashamed of herself. But the real damage came from Brandon's family. Because unlike my parents, they actually cared about reputation. Apparently, Brandon's parents were horrified, not by the inheritance, by the deception, by the entitlement, by the lies. The wedding was postponed, then quietly suspended. A few weeks later, I heard rumors the engagement itself was struggling. I never bothered verifying them. By then, I had stopped caring. Over the following month, I changed my phone number, upgraded security around the property, installed additional cameras, and for the first time in years, I felt peaceful, really peaceful. Funny enough, some of the people who reached out afterward were relatives I'd barely known. Without my parents controlling the narrative, they finally got to know me as a person, not as Claire's brother, not as the family disappointment, just me. Then one afternoon, a handwritten letter arrived, my father's handwriting. I almost threw it away. Instead, I read it. It was an apology, sort of. He admitted mistakes, mentioned regrets, talked about wanting a fresh start, talked about family. Talked about healing. What he didn't mention was why it took losing public support before he suddenly wanted reconciliation. That part was missing. The letter is still sitting in a drawer. I haven't responded. Maybe I will someday, maybe I won't. Honestly, I don't know. What I do know is this. Every evening I sit on the same deck where Uncle Raymond and I used to watch the ocean. Sometimes I think about everything that happened, the lawsuits, the lies, the betrayal, the chaos. And sometimes I imagine what he'd say. I think he'd probably laugh, take a sip of coffee, look out at the water and say something simple. "Good job standing your ground, kid." Maybe he's right, because in the end, the most valuable thing I inherited wasn't the house, it wasn't the investments, it wasn't the money, it was finally learning that protecting your peace isn't selfish, even when the people demanding access to it happen to share your last name. Now I'm curious what you think. Was I right to expose my family publicly after everything they did, or should I have handled it privately and given them one more chance? Let me know down in the comments, because this one still divides people every time I tell the story, and I'd genuinely love to hear where you stand.